Meg Collins woke up to the sound of birds she did not know. They made sounds like small bells ringing in the trees outside her window. She lay in her bed for a moment and looked at the ceiling. It was not like any ceiling on Earth. It was made of a smooth white material that glowed softly with the morning light. She had been on Prime for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks on a planet that was 17 light years from home. 3 weeks of strange food, strange air, and strange creatures who walked on 4 legs but talked like people. Meg pushed herself out of bed and walked to the small window. Outside, the twin suns of Prime were just starting to rise. One sun was larger and orange. The other was smaller and white. Together, they painted the sky in colors that Earth had never seen. Shades of pink and gold mixed with deep purple near the horizon. She was 32 years old, a lieutenant in the human Space Corps, and the first human to ever live among the people. The Galactic Council had chosen her for this job because she was calm. She did not panic easily. She was good at watching and learning. These were important skills when you lived among aliens. They were cat-like beings. They stood about 4 feet tall and walked on 2 legs, though they could run on all 4 when they wanted to go fast. Their fur was silver blue, like moonlight on water. Their eyes were large and golden, and they seemed to see everything. Nothing escaped their notice. Meg had been assigned to the district. This was where the young learned and grew. The cubs, as they were called, ranged in age from what humans would consider toddlers to teenagers. They were curious and quick and full of questions. Her job was simple. She was supposed to help the two species understand each other. They had only joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago. They were still new to the idea of other intelligent beings in the universe, and humans were very new to them. Meg stretched her arms above her head and yawned. Then she walked to the small kitchen area in her quarters. It was not really a kitchen. It was more like a counter with a few machines that could heat food and water, but it was enough. She reached into the cabinet and pulled out her portable kettle. It was one of the few things from Earth she had brought with her. The kettle was old and dented. It had belonged to her grandmother and her grandmother's mother before that. 4 generations of Collins women had made their tea with this kettle. Meg filled it with water from the purifier and set it on the heating pad. Then she opened a small tin box and looked inside. There were only 20 tea bags left. Earl, her favorite. She would need to ask the supply ship for more when it came next month. While the water heated, she thought about her grandmother. Ruth Collins had been a strong woman with white hair and hands that were always busy. She had taught Meg many things: how to sew a button, how to read a map, how to sit quietly and think before speaking. But the most important lesson had been about tea. Tea is not just a drink, her grandmother had said. It is a moment of peace. When you make tea, you are telling the world to wait. You are saying that you matter, that this moment matters. Never rush your tea, Meg. The world will still be there when you finish. Meg smiled at the memory. Her grandmother had been dead for 6 years now. But every morning when Meg made her tea, she felt close to her again. The kettle began to make noise. Small bubbles formed at the bottom and rose to the top. Meg watched them dance and spin. When the water was ready, she poured it into her cup. The cup was white with a small chip on the rim. It was not beautiful, but it was hers. She dropped the tea bag into the water and watched the color spread. Dark brown tendrils reached out from the bag like fingers. They swirled and mixed until the whole cup was a warm golden brown. The smell rose up to meet her. It was the smell of home, the smell of Earth, the smell of her grandmother's kitchen. Meg picked up the cup and walked to the small balcony outside her room. The balcony looked out over the courtyard. Below, she could see the learning gardens where the cubs spent their days. Right now, the gardens were empty. It was still early. She sat down on the small chair she had placed on the balcony. The chair was too low for a human built for bodies, but Meg did not mind. She liked sitting close to the ground. She raised the cup to her lips and took her first sip. The tea was hot and bitter and perfect. She closed her eyes and let out a long breath. The warmth spread through her chest and down into her stomach. Her shoulders dropped. Her hands relaxed around the cup. This was her favorite moment of each day. Before the meetings and the questions and the endless work of being an ambassador, before she had to smile and explain and try to make two very different species understand each other. Before all of that, she had this. Just her and her tea and the rising suns. She did not know that she was being watched. In the garden below, hidden behind a bush with large purple flowers, a young cub named was staring up at the balcony. Her golden eyes were wide. Her ears were pressed forward in concentration. She had been awake since before dawn, unable to sleep because of bad dreams. She had come to the garden to watch the sun's rise. Instead, she had found something much more interesting. The human was doing something strange, something that looked important, had watched her heat the water with great care. She had watched her pour it over the dried leaves. She had watched her carry the cup to the balcony and sit down like she was preparing for something sacred. And then the human had closed her eyes and breathed deep and smiled. Her whole body had changed. The tension had left her like water flowing downhill. She had become peaceful, calm, content. Did not know what she was seeing, but she knew it mattered. The human was performing some kind of ritual, a morning blessing perhaps, a way of connecting with the universe before starting the day. The cub stayed very still behind her bush. She did not want the human to see her. She wanted to watch more, to understand what this strange creature was doing. Meg opened her eyes and looked out at the gardens. She did not see the small figure hiding in the purple flowers. She only saw the empty paths and the learning stations and the two suns climbing higher into the sky. She took another sip of her tea and thought about the day ahead. She had a meeting with the elders at midday. They wanted to talk about how the cubs were reacting to her presence. Were they scared? Curious? Both. Meg hoped they were curious. Curiosity was good. It meant they wanted to learn. And learning was the whole point of her being here. She finished her tea slowly, savoring every drop. When the cup was empty, she sat for another moment, just breathing. Then she stood up and went inside to get ready for the day. Behind the purple bush, stayed where she was. Her mind was racing with questions. She needed to tell the others. She needed to show them what she had seen. The human had a secret, a morning ritual that brought her peace, and was determined to learn what it meant. She waited until the human had gone back inside. Then she ran off through the garden, her four paws silent on the stone paths. She had a lot of work to do before tomorrow's dawn. Found her litter mates in the sleeping hall. They were just waking up, stretching their small bodies and yawning with their sharp little teeth. There were 5 of them in her group, and little Puck, who was the youngest and always asking questions. She gathered them in a corner and spoke in a whisper. She told them about the human, about the water and the dried leaves and the cup, about how the human had closed her eyes and breathed deep and become peaceful. The others listened with their ears pointed forward and their tails wrapped around their paws. Asked if she was sure, said she was very sure. She had watched the whole thing. The human had performed a ritual right there on her balcony as the suns rose over the gardens. Wanted to know what kind of ritual it was. Did not know, but she had an idea. In their own culture, morning rituals were sacred. They believed that the first moments of each day set the path for everything that followed. If you started the day with peace, you would find peace. If you started with anger, you would find anger. The human seemed to understand this. Her ritual was a way of finding peace before the day began. It was a blessing, a prayer, a connection to something bigger than herself. The cubs decided they would all watch the next morning. They would hide in the garden and see the ritual for themselves. Then they would decide what to do. That night could not sleep. She kept thinking about the human and her strange morning practice. What was the drink made of? What did it smell like? What did the human think about while she drank it? The suns rose early on Prime. By the time the sky began to lighten, All 6 cubs were already in the garden. They had found a good hiding spot behind a row of flowering bushes. From there, they could see the humans' balcony clearly. They waited. The door to the humans' quarters opened. Meg stepped out onto the balcony carrying her cup. Steam rose from it in lazy curls. She was wearing soft clothes, the kind humans wore for sleeping. Her hair was messy and her eyes were still heavy with rest. The cubs watched her sit down in her small chair. They watched her wrap both hands around the cup. They watched her close her eyes and breathe in the steam. Made a small sound of wonder, quickly put a paw over her mouth to keep her quiet. Meg did not hear them. She was lost in her own world. She took a sip from her cup and let out a soft sound of pleasure. Her whole body seemed to relax. The tension in her shoulders melted away. Her face became smooth and calm. Little Puck tugged on his tail. He wanted to know why the human was glowing, looked more carefully. Puck was right. There was a faint light around the human. It was very soft, almost invisible, but it was there. Later would learn that this was just the morning sunlight hitting the human skin. But in that moment, she was certain she was seeing something magical. The human's ritual was giving her power. It was filling her with light. The cubs watched until Meg finished her drink and went back inside. Then they gathered in a circle to discuss what they had seen. Said the human was clearly a holy person. No ordinary being could glow like that. Agreed. She said the drink must be made from sacred plants. Perhaps it was a potion that connected the human to her ancestors. Thought the ritual was about gratitude. The human was thanking the universe for a new day. She was starting each morning by remembering how lucky she was to be alive. Had a different idea. She thought the ritual was about preparation. The human was gathering her strength before facing the challenges ahead. The drink gave her power and peace and focus. Little Puck did not have any theories. He just wanted to try the drink for himself. Listen to all of them. Each idea made sense in its own way, but she felt there was something deeper going on. The human's ritual was not just about one thing, it was about everything: connection, gratitude, preparation, peace. All of these things mixed together into a single morning practice. She decided they needed to learn more. They would keep watching. They would gather information. And when they understood the ritual fully, they would share their knowledge with the other cubs. The days passed. Each morning, the 6 cubs hid in the garden and watched the human drink her sacred beverage. Each morning, they noticed new details. The way she held the cup with such care. The way she always faced the rising suns. The way her breathing became slow and deep as she drank. By the end of the first week, word had spread to other cubs. They wanted to see the human's ritual too. Tried to keep the watching group small, but it was impossible. Cubs kept sneaking into the garden before dawn. By the 8th day, there were 15 of them hiding behind the bushes. On the 9th day, something happened that changed everything. Meg woke up earlier than usual. She had a meeting with the Galactic Council that morning, and she was nervous about it. She decided to have her tea before the suns rose. Hopping the early quiet would help her think. She stepped onto the balcony with her cup and froze. In the garden below, 15 cubs were sitting in a circle. They were arranged with perfect spacing, like points on a clock. Their paws were folded in their laps. Their golden eyes were fixed on her balcony. They were completely still and silent. Meg stared down at them. They stared up at her. For a long moment, nobody moved. Meg's heart was beating fast. She did not know what was happening. Had she done something wrong? Were the cubs angry with her? Were they waiting for something? Then, sitting at the front of the circle, bowed her head slightly. The other cubs did the same. It was a gesture of respect in culture, a way of honoring someone without words. Meg did not know what to do. She bowed her head back, copying their movement. It seemed like the right thing to do. The cubs raised their heads and continued to watch her. Meg decided to just continue her morning routine. Maybe if she acted normal, the cubs would get bored and leave. She sat down in her chair and raised her cup to her lips. She took a sip. The cubs let out a soft humming sound. It was low and harmonious, like a song without words. The sound vibrated through the morning air and made Meg's skin tingle. She took another sip. The humming continued. She finished her tea slowly, very aware of every movement she made. When the cup was empty, she lowered it and looked down at the cubs. They were still watching her with those big golden eyes. Then, as if following some signal Meg could not see, they all stood up at the same time. They bowed to her once more, and then they turned and walked away through the garden paths, disappearing into the morning mist. Meg sat on her balcony for a long time after they left. She was trying to understand what had just happened. The cubs had been watching her. They had arranged themselves in a circle. They had bowed to her and hummed while she drank her tea. It felt like she had been part of something, a ceremony, a ritual, but she had no idea what it meant. She went inside and got dressed for her meeting, but all through the day she could not stop thinking about those golden eyes looking up at her, about the humming that had made her bones vibrate, about the perfect circle in the garden. Something was happening, something she did not understand. And tomorrow morning, she suspected, the cubs would be back. The cubs came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and every morning for the next 2 weeks. Meg watched the circle grow larger each day. On the first day after she noticed them, there were 15 cubs. By the third day, there were 25. By the end of the first week, nearly 50 small bodies sat in perfect formation in the garden below her balcony. She did not know what to do about it. She tried asking the elders, but they seemed confused by her questions. They said the cubs were free to sit in the garden if they wanted. It was not against any rules. Meg tried asking the cubs themselves, but every time she approached them outside of the morning ritual, they would run away. They were too shy to talk to her. They would only come close during tea time, and even then they stayed in their circle, watching in silence. The humming had become a regular part of the morning. As soon as Meg took her first sip, the cubs would begin their low, harmonious sound. It rose and fell with her breathing. When she swallowed, the pitch would change slightly. When she lowered the cup, the humming would soften. When she raised it again, it would grow stronger. It was strange and beautiful, and a little bit frightening. Meg started to pay more attention to her tea routine. She had always made tea the same way, but now she found herself being extra careful. She measured the water exactly right. She waited until the kettle was at the perfect temperature. She let the tea steep for exactly 4 minutes before removing the bag. She told herself it was just because she wanted good tea, but deep down she knew the truth. She was performing for the cubs. She wanted to show them that she took this seriously, that their attention meant something to her. The days grew warmer as the summer approached. The twin suns rose earlier and set later. The gardens filled with flowers that smelled like honey and grass. And still, the cubs came each morning to watch Meg drink her tea. News of the gathering had spread beyond the district. Adults began to ask questions. What was the human doing with the young ones? What was she teaching them? Some were curious. Others were worried. The elders called a meeting to discuss the situation. Meg was invited to attend. She sat at a large round table with 6 elderly, their silver-blue fur streaked with white. They looked at her with calm eyes and asked her to explain what was happening. Meg told them the truth. She said that every morning she drank tea. It was a human custom, a way of starting the day with something warm and comforting. She did not know why the cubs had started watching her. She had not invited them. She had not asked them to form a circle or to hum. They had done all of that on their own. The elders spoke among themselves in their own language. Meg could not understand what they were saying, but she could tell they were not angry. They seemed more puzzled than anything else. Finally, the eldest of the elders, a female named Counselor, turned to her and spoke. She said that the cubs believed Meg was performing a sacred ritual. They had interpreted her tea drinking as a morning blessing, a way of connecting with the spiritual forces of the universe. Meg did not know what to say. She had never thought of tea that way. It was just something she did because she liked it, because it reminded her of her grandmother, because it helped her wake up in the morning. But as she thought about it more, she realized that maybe the cubs were not entirely wrong. There was something ritual-like about her tea routine, the careful preparation, the quiet moment of peace before the busy day, the way she always faced the suns and closed her eyes and breathed deep. Maybe the cubs had seen something true about her that she had never noticed in herself. Counselor asked Meg what she wanted to do about the situation. The elders would support whatever decision she made. If she wanted the cubs to stop watching her, they would tell them to stay away. If she was comfortable with the attention, they would let things continue. Meg thought about it for a long time. The cubs were not hurting anyone. They were just watching. And there was something sweet about their dedication, the way they woke up early each morning just to see her drink tea. She told the elders that she did not mind. The cubs could keep watching if they wanted, but she also said she would like to understand them better. She wanted to know why they thought her tea was sacred. She wanted to learn about their beliefs and share her own. The elders agreed that this was a good plan. They said they would tell the cubs that the human had given her blessing for them to continue their morning watching, and they would arrange for Meg to meet with some of the older cubs to discuss the meaning behind what they had been doing. That night, Meg lay in bed and thought about everything that had happened. She had come to Prime to help two species understand each other. She had expected that to mean meetings and reports and formal cultural exchanges. She had not expected it to mean drinking tea while 50 cubs hummed in a garden. But maybe this was better. Maybe understanding did not come from official programs and careful plans. Maybe it came from small moments of connection, from watching and being watched, from finding meaning in the everyday. The next morning, the circle was bigger than ever. Meg counted 63 cubs sitting in the garden. They had arranged themselves in perfect rings, like ripples spreading out from a stone dropped in water. Was at the center of the innermost ring, her golden eyes fixed on the balcony above. Meg made her tea with extra care. She heated the water slowly. She let the steam rise high before pouring it over the tea bag. She watched the color spread through the cup like paint dissolving in water. When she stepped onto the balcony, the cubs began their humming immediately. The sound was deeper now, richer, with so many voices joining together. It filled the garden and rose up to where Meg stood. She could feel it in her chest, like a second heartbeat. She sat down and raised the cup to her lips. The humming grew stronger. She took her first sip and closed her eyes. In that moment, she understood something important. It did not matter if tea was sacred or not. What mattered was that these young beings saw something meaningful in what she did. They had found beauty in her simple morning routine. They had turned an ordinary act into something extraordinary. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not about tea, not about rituals, but about how the way we see things can change what they are. The cubs had looked at Meg drinking tea and seen a blessing, and now, because of them, it had become one. She finished her tea slowly, savoring every moment. When the cup was empty, she stood and bowed to the cubs below. They bowed back, all 63 of them moving as one. Then she went inside to face the day, carrying the warmth of the morning with her like a gift. The message from the Galactic Council arrived on a gray morning. The sky was filled with clouds for the first time since Meg had arrived on Prime. Rain fell in soft sheets across the garden, and the cubs had gathered under the covered walkway instead of their usual circle. Meg read the message twice to make sure she understood it. A special ambassador was being sent to investigate her activities. There had been complaints from 3 different species about what she was doing with the cubs. They claimed she was spreading human religion without permission. They said she was breaking the rules of cultural exchange. Her stomach felt cold as she put down her data pad. This was not good. The Galactic Council took religious interference very seriously. If they decided she had broken the rules, she could be sent home. Her career would be over. And worse, the relationship between humans and could be damaged. The ambassador arrived 3 days later. His name was Hayes, and he was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that seemed to look right through you. He had been with the diplomatic corps for 30 years. He had solved disputes between species that had been fighting for centuries. He did not smile when he shook Meg's hand. They met in a conference room at the human station. Hayes sat on one side of the table. Meg sat on the other. Between them was a stack of reports and complaints and official documents. Hayes started talking without any greeting. He said that 3 species had filed formal complaints about her activities. The Federation claimed she was conducting religious ceremonies with minors. The collective said she was using mind control techniques disguised as meditation. The Assembly accused her of cultural contamination and demanded she be removed from the planet immediately. Meg listened to each complaint with growing disbelief. Mind control, religious ceremonies. She had just been drinking tea. How had something so simple become so complicated? Hayes asked her to explain exactly what she had been doing each morning. He wanted every detail: the water temperature, the type of leaves, the position of her chair, everything. So Meg told him. She explained about the kettle that had belonged to her grandmother. She talked about the Earl tea she had brought from Earth. She described how she sat on her balcony and watched the suns rise while she drank. She told him about her grandmother's belief that tea was a moment of peace, a way of telling the world to wait. Hayes wrote everything down. His face did not change as she spoke. He did not interrupt or ask questions. He just listened and wrote and waited for her to finish. When she was done, he looked up at her with those sharp eyes. He asked if she had ever told the cubs that tea was sacred. She said no. He asked if she had invited them to watch her. She said no. He asked if she had taught them the humming or the bowing or any other part of what they did each morning. Meg shook her head. The cubs had done all of that on their own. She had just kept drinking her tea like she always had. The ritual, if that was what it was, had been created by the cubs themselves. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked to meet with the elders. He wanted to hear their side of the story. The meeting was held that afternoon. Counselor arrived with 2 other elders, their silver-blue fur carefully groomed and their golden eyes calm. They sat across from Hayes and waited for him to speak. Hayes asked them what they believed was happening in the garden each morning, answered in her slow, careful way. She said that the cubs had observed the human performing a morning practice. They had seen her prepare her drink with great care. They had watched her consume it with what appeared to be deep reverence. And they had concluded, based on their own cultural understanding, that she was engaged in a spiritual activity. Hayes asked if the human had ever told them it was spiritual. Said no. The human had explained that tea was just a drink from her home world, but the cubs had made their own interpretation. They had seen something meaningful in her actions and had responded in the way their culture taught them to respond to meaningful things. Hayes asked if this was a problem, smiled slightly. She said it was not a problem at all. The cubs were not being converted to anything. They were not abandoning their own beliefs. They were simply recognizing something familiar in an unfamiliar being. The human valued her morning moments of peace. So did the. The cubs had found common ground without being taught to find it. Hayes turned to Meg. He asked if she understood what the elder was saying. Meg nodded. The cubs had not her religion. They had not adopted human beliefs. They had seen her do something that resonated with their own values and had honored it in their own way. Hayes put down his pen and leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a very long time. Finally, he spoke. He said that he had been doing this job for 30 years. He had seen species fight wars over misunderstandings smaller than this. He had watched alliances fall apart because one culture did not understand another. But he had also seen moments of genuine connection, times when two very different peoples found something they could share. This, he said, was one of those moments. The complaints from the other species were based on fear, not facts. They had heard about what was happening and had assumed the worst. They had not bothered to learn the truth. They had not talked to thee or to Meg. They had just filed their papers and made their accusations. Hayes said he would dismiss the complaints. He would write a report explaining what had actually happened, and he would recommend that the morning tea gathering be officially recognized as a successful cultural exchange. Meg felt tears forming in her eyes. She tried to blink them away but noticed. The old reached across the table and placed a paw on Meg's hand. It was warm and soft and comforting. The human was afraid, said. She had thought she was in trouble. She had worried that her simple habit had caused harm. Meg nodded. That was exactly what she had feared. Squeezed her hand gently. She said that the cubs adored Meg. They talked about her all day long. They had learned that peace could be found in small moments. They had learned that different species could share something beautiful without even speaking. These were good lessons, important lessons. Meg was not in trouble, she was a teacher. That evening, Meg walked through the garden alone. The rain had stopped and the twin suns were setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. She thought about everything that had happened, about the complaints and the investigation and the moment when she thought her world was falling apart. And then she thought about the cubs, about their golden eyes and their careful circles and their soft humming, about the way they had seen something sacred in a cup of tea. Tomorrow morning she would drink her tea again, and they would watch again. And together, without planning it, without even trying, they would continue to build a bridge between two worlds. Some bridges were made of steel and stone. Others were made of hot water and dried leaves, and the belief that small moments could hold great meaning. Meg smiled and walked back to her quarters. She had a kettle to prepare. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Hayes dismissed the complaints. In that time, everything had changed. Meg was no longer called Lieutenant Collins. She had been promoted to Cultural Ambassador Collins, a new title created just for her. The Galactic Council had recognized her work with the Cubs as a model for how species should interact. Other worlds had started asking for human liaisons of their own. The morning tea gathering had grown beyond anything Meg could have imagined. Over 200 cubs now gathered in the garden each dawn. They came from every district on the continent. Some traveled for hours just to be part of the circle. Parents brought their young ones and stayed to watch from the edges of the garden. Meg had moved to a larger space with a bigger balcony. The old balcony had become too small for her to even stand on without feeling crowded by the eyes watching from below. Her new quarters overlooked a wide courtyard that could hold all the cubs with room to spare. She had also started teaching. Every afternoon, after her regular duties were done, she would sit in the garden with a group of older cubs and talk about tea. She told them about the history of the drink on Earth, how it had been discovered thousands of years ago in a place called China, how it had spread across the world and become part of many different cultures, how people had fought wars over dried leaves and hot water. The cubs listened with wonder. They could not believe that something so simple had caused so much trouble among humans, but they could also understand it. They knew what it meant to care deeply about something that others might not think was important. Meg told them about her grandmother Ruth, about the old kettle that had passed through 4 generations, about the chip on the rim of her cup, and how she refused to replace it because it held so many memories. The cubs asked many questions about human families and human memories and human ways of honoring the past. In return, the cubs taught Meg about their own morning practices. She learned that families gathered each dawn to share a moment of stillness. They did not drink anything or eat anything. They simply sat together and breathed and felt grateful for another day. It was called the quiet time, and every child learned it before they could walk. The tea gathering had become a mix of both traditions. Meg drank her tea while the cubs practiced their quiet time. Two different customs, happening at the same moment in the same space, creating something new. Had grown in the past 6 months. She was taller now, her fur darker, her eyes more knowing. She had become a leader among the cubs, the one who organized the circles and made sure everyone had a place. She took her responsibility seriously. One morning, Meg invited to join her on the balcony. The young climbed the stairs slowly, her heart beating fast. She had never been so close to the human during the morning ritual. Meg handed her a small cup. It was filled with tea, cooled down enough for a young one to drink. Looked at it with wide eyes. She asked if she was really allowed to try it. Meg smiled and said yes. The tea was meant to be shared. That was its true purpose, not to be hoarded or protected, but to bring people together. Raised the cup to her nose and smelled it first. The scent was strange to her, bitter and floral and somehow warm even though the liquid had cooled. She looked up at Meg, who nodded encouragingly. The cub took a small sip, her ears twitched, her tail went stiff, her golden eyes grew even wider than before. Meg asked if she liked it, was not sure what to say. The taste was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was not sweet like fruit or rich like meat. It was something else entirely, something that made her feel awake and calm at the same time. She took another sip, and another. By the time the cup was empty, she understood why the human loved this drink so much. It was not about the taste, it was about the moment, the pause, the feeling of warmth spreading through your body as the world waited around you. From that day on, Meg began teaching some of the older cubs how to make tea for themselves. She showed them how to heat the water and measure the leaves and wait for the right amount of time. She gave them small kettles and cups of their own. She watched as they practiced, making mistakes and learning from them. The cubs taught their families. The families taught their neighbors. Within a few months, tea had spread through the district and beyond. Merchants began importing tea leaves from human traders. Shops opened that sold nothing but tea and the tools to make it. But the most important change was not about tea at all. The Galactic Council published a report on what had happened on Prime. They called it the Collins Exchange, after Meg. The report talked about how two species had found connection through a simple morning ritual. It talked about how understanding could grow from small moments of shared experience. It talked about how the best cultural exchanges were often the ones that nobody planned. Other species began to experiment with similar programs. They sent representatives to live among aliens and just be themselves, not to teach or preach or convert, but simply to exist and let others watch. The results were mixed. Not every species responded like the cubs, but some did. And slowly, the galaxy began to learn that connection did not require grand gestures or official programs. Sometimes it just required a cup of tea and the willingness to let others see you. Meg stayed on Prime for 3 more years. She watched the cubs she had first met grow into young adults. She attended their coming-of-age ceremonies and celebrated their achievements. She became part of their world in a way she had never expected. When it was finally time to leave, the whole district gathered to say goodbye. Thousands have stood in the courtyard where the tea circles had begun. They hummed their low, harmonious song one last time as Meg stepped out onto her balcony with her grandmother's kettle. She made her tea slowly, savoring every step. The water heated. The steam rose. The color spread through the cup like a sunset. She raised it to her lips and drank while the humming filled the air around her. When the cup was empty, she set it down and looked out at the sea of golden eyes. She wanted to say something important, something that would capture everything she had learned and felt during her time here, but words seemed too small for the moment. Instead, she simply bowed, a deep bow like the cubs had taught her, a bow of gratitude and respect and love. They bowed back, all of them, at once. The movement was like a wave rolling across the courtyard. Then Meg turned and walked inside for the last time. Her bags were packed. Her shuttle was waiting. A new assignment was calling her to another world, another species, another chance to build bridges. She carried her grandmother's kettle with her. It was old and dented and had traveled 17 light years from home. It had started a revolution without meaning to. It had changed how two species saw each other. It had taught thousands of young aliens that peace could be found in small moments. Meg smiled as she boarded the shuttle. She did not know what waited for her on the next world, but she knew one thing for certain. Wherever she went, she would bring her tea. And maybe, just maybe, someone would see something meaningful in the way she drank it. Maybe another circle would form. Maybe another bridge would be built. The galaxy was vast and full of strangers, but strangers were just friends who had not yet shared a moment of quiet together. And Meg had learned that a cup of tea was a very good place to start. The shuttle lifted off from Prime as the twin suns reached their peak. Below, in the courtyard, watched it rise into the sky. She was holding a cup of her own now, filled with tea she had made herself. She raised it toward the departing ship in a silent toast. Then she drank, just like the human had taught her, slowly, peacefully, with gratitude for the moment and hope for all the moments to come. The circle would continue. The ritual would live on. And somewhere in the stars, a woman with an old kettle would keep teaching the galaxy that the smallest things could hold the greatest power. Not through force or fear or grand designs, but through a simple cup of tea, shared with anyone willing to sit in a circle and watch the morning come.